Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our presentation about customer support in the age of large language models. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, if you're joining us through the On24 console, please be sure to check out all the engagement widgets on the screen. You'll see an attendee chat, and my colleagues are on the back end ready to respond to any of your questions and feedback. We have a survey, which we'd very much appreciate any kind of responses to. There's an option to send us some emoticons live, which we'd love to see at the bottom of the screen. We'll be sharing a link to our Slack channel, and so be sure to join that if you haven't yet. And finally, for everyone joining us live through any of our social channels, we are monitoring those chats, so please do feel free to ask any questions you have. Now, with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce my guest, the founder and CEO of VoiceBot.ai, Bret Kinsella. Bret, thank you so much for joining today.
Emerson, really happy to be here. How are you doing?
Doing great. So let's dive in. Bret, I wanted to start with you. If you want to give us sort of your perspectives on some of the fundamentals or first principles of this particular topic.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of things across the technology. And I've seen a lot of people trying to figure out how to forecast where this is going to have an impact, how they can better understand where it's really a change from what we have and where it's the biggest change. And I always sort of go back to first principles. And there are a lot of things that generative AI can do. But one of the things, particularly for enterprises, is it's really good at analyzing text. And that means it's good if you have a lot of text already. So you might have a big catalog of text. You take a lot of text inbound, like a call center, or you generate a lot of text. And that could be also from your call center agents, but it could be from your staff, like publishing research and reports. If you're financial services, doing research reports, those types of things. And so that's the first thing I look at. And I think the critical thing that a lot of people don't grok immediately is that one of the key areas within organizations that resisted automation to date is anything based on unstructured text data. And that could be code, and we've already seen like a big movement in that front, but it's also all the conversations that people are having. And this is an area that you and I have spent a lot of time in the conversational space. And so that is the area where we've just had humans. We've relied almost exclusively on humans to make this work. And now we actually have this amazing automation technology. And so I just look at it and say, okay, what job functions actually deal with a lot of text-based data? It could be speech, but also the text-based data. And which industries have a lot of that?
It's interesting that you mentioned about that kind of technological limitation, because even with the advent of chatbots and widespread adoption over the last, let's say, decade or so, those virtual agents are still very limited by the text that you put in and their ability to understand what you mean and the complex task, and then their ability to actually act upon some kind of solution, either take a specific action or respond back in a natural, conversational, kind of educational fashion to a particular customer.
Yeah, those are really two big gulfs that I see in the market. So first of all, I think a lot of us have been surprised at how much better large language models are than intent models. So when we were building on NLUs, the traditional NLP stack, we did a lot of amazing things with that. It got really far. I mean, just think about like what Alexa was able to do. But we also sort of hit a frontier in terms of where we're just getting marginal returns after a certain period of time. It was getting better. But then all of a sudden we're starting to see with large language models, we're seeing leaps. So certain areas that maybe the intent models were too brittle to understand, or just all of these sort of everyday out of domain questions and how you handle those elegantly. So that's one of the key things that I've been thinking about a lot is that piece in particular. And I think if you think about the conversational AI space as well, the other thing we think about is actually the data that you're actually going out to get. And how well can your system interpret that data? Today, if we're going to do an intent-based model, we have a database with all the predetermined answers, as opposed to, and if your search space is an exabyte of data or even just several terabytes of data, you can't actually chunk that down into these prescribed things. And I think that's those are a couple areas that I think about in terms of how this is truly transformational. And the contact center is a place where this is just manifesting very quickly.
So, when I think of these kind of potential solutions for partners and users, whether it's the companies that we work with or the actual end users who are interacting with the technology. One of the things we do at Amazon is always tie it back to some of our leadership principles. And one of my favorites, and one of the ones that I think is most relevant in this space, is that notion of customer obsession, sort of directly aligned with opportunity to provide extraordinary customer support. And I think those, thinking about where it can evolve in the age of large language models, I think the fundamentals there are very similar to what it has been in the age of voice-based assistants and in the age of chatbots as well, that the virtual agent needs to be convenient, accessible across whatever kinds of platforms a user might find particularly convenient in the moment. It needs to be efficient. It needs to be easier for me to get this assistance than trying to solve it on my own, or trying to go to a competitor to get them to solve it. It's got to be reliable. It has to actually work, and it has to work every time you interact with it, so that customers get that kind of trust with you that not just is the main product or service you're providing high quality, but then any of the support behind that is high quality as well. It's got to be personalized, right? The experience that I have troubleshooting a network issue with a wireless router should probably be different than the experience that you're going to have. Should be different than the experience that my largely non-technical parents are going to have. Because of the devices, the historical experience, right? My technical comfort versus other people. And then one function that I see large language models really enabling, radically different from solutions before, is this notion of proactivity. So rather than placing the burden on me as the customer to discover an issue and then seek out a resolution myself, being able to identify that based on that vast amount of data that a large language model based solution has access to, and sort of proactively solve those on behalf of the user and on behalf of the company, further contributes to that notion of customer obsession, providing them the best possible service.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. In fact, I wrote about this when Amazon announced the Ring doorbell concierge back in 2019, sort of this idea of the machine being able to do something for you when you're not there, like giving instructions to the delivery person about where to put the packages, or automatically determining like how to connect you in if you're not in the home to somebody who might be at the front door. And that's one of the many examples that people think about. And I think this idea of agency is important. The other thing too, which is really interesting, and there might be people overlooking this piece, is that it's the integration of the action-based model to be able to do things. So we talk about this idea of like a knowing assistant and a doing assistant. And Alexa is like an amazing doing assistant. Like it does a lot of things. And we've had other assistants that have done that in the past, and they've really focused on that. But there's also this knowing assistant, and like Alexa's pretty good at that, but it doesn't have access to all the knowledge of the world, sure, like the generative AI solutions. And so in the generative AI solutions, just being so good at like analyzing a lot of data and synthesizing it and then regurgitating it in a meaningful way. And that's what I think is like super interesting, is the merging of the knowing and doing assistant, because the popular generative AI solutions today are good at knowing, but they can't do anything, or what they can do is very circumscribed. And actually putting those two pieces together is the first step. And then adding agency on top of that, obviously, is a big level up.
So I guess before we dive into the specific capabilities or use cases, what other barriers have prevented us from getting to that kind of combination knowing and doing assistant in the past?
Well, I think there's a couple things. So just the knowing and doing, first of all, just because you know things doesn't mean you know how to navigate to execute things, right? That's different. And then we've heard about this like new concept of like large action models, right? We've got large language models, large action models. Large action models are basically just an automation of an orchestration layer. It's basically being able to go out, decide where to go to fulfill this, how to go through all the steps that the other machine might have it go through. And so I think that's like a really interesting place that the generative space is coming in with this. But in general, there's just a lot of touch points. And, I've had this conversation with Adam Chyer and Doug Kitlaus. A lot of people know them from the original Siri team, back in the day. They're like, there's a technology aspect here, but it's really a business aspect. And you have to have relationships with other companies and these types of things. And so I think that's like really important. And that's why some of the generative AI solutions that are out there right now, it's going to take them much longer to get to the doing aspect than a lot of people thought. The key barrier that I'm seeing right now, or barriers, is twofold. One is data readiness. There's a lot of data out there that people want to use generative AI for, but it's not ready. Some of it, like very simple, it's in tables, for example, can be a difficulty. But there's a lot of places that I've looked, like for example, they automated a service desk. It took them 3 months to update their data, their documentation for their service, to automate the service desk, IT help desk call-in or bot. It only took them basically 2 weeks to implement the system, right? So it's just, and that's actually at a smaller scale because that was fairly narrow in scope in terms of that service desk. But like data readiness is key, and then the other is just policies. Like, do people have the policies and governance in place that they know that the system's doing what they want to do? These are business issues. These aren't technology issues. Technology is actually pretty ready for it. But each of those things I talk about, the processes around doing, the data readiness, the governance and policy, these are things that can be done now that the technology is there, and they need to be done.
So now, how do you see, because many companies are in either the early stages or some are actually fairly mature in their adoption of generative AI and integration of this new type of service into many of their existing legacy services. How do you see that kind of reflecting on or driving some of the evolution of that customer support experience?
Well, it's true. They're all very early. I mean, I think that there's a couple different things that I'm seeing. So first of all, most of the organizations are in this sort of launch and learn mode. And the lowest risk areas where they can launch and learn is they're basically updating their FAQ bots, like on a website or in some sort of contact center app right away, because generally they're actually surfacing the proper results much better. They're being able to more likely align through a conversational interaction to find the right thing, allowing it just to understand some of the more natural language inputs that might not have been anticipated by the intent model. The other place that they're really focused on, or the other place that I think that they're going is agent assist. So, and this is the same thing on the other side of the desk. So the agent has all of these types of capabilities that it could actually access, all these knowledge bases, but just give it the same type of capability as the FAQ. And I do differentiate between sort of FAQs and assistants, because I think of the FAQ things as really be more of a very rich search functionality, bringing it back. Whereas when you get into more assistant capability, there's just like back and forth. And those are the first two. Well, actually, the other one that's actually just a no-brainer that almost everybody's starting to do is summarization. If you're not familiar with the call center, I think most people probably watching today are, but if you're not, like after the call's done, the agent oftentimes has to do like a quick summary and like accept summaries and change things and add some data. It's very similar to what we've seen in healthcare, right? So a doctor meets with a patient, they have to spend all this time entering information to the EMR. If you can listen at the same time they're talking to the patient, it can actually just give them some information that they can review and edit and then submit. And the time savings on summaries for some of these call centers is like amazing. It's going from like 10 minutes down to less than a minute and a half, depending on how complex it is. But like really tremendous time savings just on that summary. And those people can then go back and they can like service another customer so that your wait queue gets much shorter.
That's interesting, because I do see a lot of companies really focusing on really coming at some of this automation from a lens of just call deflection, saying, okay, if I can provide an automated mechanism on a mobile app, on a website, through an IVR system, if I can provide an automated mechanism for a customer to just solve their problem 100% of the time, then great, I don't have to pick up the phone and talk to them. I can reduce the size of my call center staffing. But there are a lot of cases where a customer will need some of that human touch, is ultimately going to need to talk to a real physical agent. And there is a wealth of opportunity there, either from preparing the agent based on the extraordinary amount of information that they know about the caller and that they've captured through the ingress point, and they know about their personal capabilities, their history. But then even after that call, like you said, making the agent's continued tasks and continued functions that much more effective and efficient provides significant benefits even for companies that have comparatively small customer support function.
Yeah, very true. It's almost like it's an augment first, automate second market in the way it's rolling out. Now, like FAQ bots being separate because it's kind of this cul-de-sac that doesn't really touch anything meaningful from the internal systems. And so it's very low risk. If it goes wrong, their FAQ search probably wasn't very good anyway. I mean, so it's already a significant plus up. But the areas that I'm seeing like immediate benefit are really augmenting the humans. And then the other thing too is like people have to think about this. It's one thing to sort of log in to a system and then the system knows who you are and has your account history and then can respond to you based on that. And I think of that as more in the assistant category, whether that's assistant like for you and me as consumers or that's for the call center agent, sort of that integrated view. There's not a lot of that that's been done yet with generative AI systems. And one of the issues is we sort of go back to these policies and governance issues. There's some concern about how you actually segregate the data and just making sure. And it's not that there's not practices for this. There are. It's just everybody has to agree that these are the practices that they feel are safe in order that if you're going to use an LLM with live customer data, PII even potentially, or financial information, which might be concerning, you just need to make sure that everybody's in agreement that that's how you're going to handle it. And this is how you're going to segment and make sure that data doesn't actually go through the LLM.
Do you see companies getting more mature, more evolved in those processes, or is it still very much the early days like it was, a decade ago in the early days of providing voice-based assistant capabilities?
No, it's immature. I mean, I think everybody recognizes that. So all those systems had bounded outputs historically. And so that's where it was just basically picking from a database or it was going to a third-party system to execute a transaction or something like that. So although it was unbounded in the inset, it was basically procedural from that point forward, if you think about it that way. And when we go with LLMs, it's unbounded input and unbounded output. And so then that creates a whole new set of dynamics that people have to consider. Like, so if you're a pharma company, can you just throw any information out there? It's not even that it's inaccurate, but is it approved by legal, right? And so those are the types of things that people are thinking about. Now, not everybody's under the same stipulations as pharma, but everybody has something like that. And so what I'm seeing is mostly organizations are looking at their low risk activities. And they're doing those first, and sort of they can learn, they can build their policies and their agreements around that, their automation around that, and then they're looking at moving up to the higher risk items, which makes total sense. It's like one of the most rational technology adoption cycles I've ever seen. Even though people think it's like this, everyone's just jumping in. Actually, people are making very sound decisions, and they're saying, "Hey, I've got some things that haven't been able to be automated before. I can automate them, and I'll just do the low risk ones first."
So it sounds like then a good recommendation for our viewers and listeners is identifying those areas where not only can the LLMs have a significant impact on the end user or on the internal employee experience, but also things that are actually achievable given their experience, given their comfort with this kind of new technology.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. People are learning fast, but there's more gaps, I think, that people have than they have blueprints, right? So we're just not there yet. Everything's a little bit different, but there are some emerging practices around this. So for example, just on the governance front, NIST in the United States is actually very advanced, and it's actually being updated right now. It's going to be even more advanced. So I think it's progressing really well. We do have these barriers though. And I think the data readiness thing is people just have to plan that in because it's data readiness, it's testing, all these other things that it's a little bit different than what they've seen in the past.
I think a challenge that we've seen as well is that companies are starting small, but not necessarily thinking big, don't necessarily have that kind of long-term holistic vision about how they're going to deploy a consistent experience across all of their omni-channel touchpoints that they have with their customers and with their internal users as well. We've seen that with Alexa in the past, that there's a lot of web browsers out there that people have, chatbots or virtual agents deployed on. There's a lot of mobile phones out there, and people have mobile apps. There's a lot of Alexa devices out there, more than 500 million by our last count. Customers are using those billions of times every day, and the potential significant impact that companies can have by deploying some kind of novel new LLM-backed solution onto this platform as well. Again, just sort of further reinforces that notion of providing the optimal customer support in a tailored, useful, kind of broadly accessible fashion.
Yeah, I think there's two layers to this. So first of all, you're 100% right. And I think we have to meet people where they are. This is a lot to absorb. And so I went through this with the web. I mean, we went from an analog world, predominantly analog. There was some digital, but it was only at your office, maybe, or your factory, maybe. It wasn't like in the home. And then we went to this idea of the web, and like everything was digital. We did not have digital assets. We did not have digital systems, all these other types of things. And so we had to develop new mental models, new expectations about what it could be. And it doesn't really matter how many people are like, this could be the future. This could be the future. Like, watch this movie, right? And it's like, that could be your future. There's still a big gulf for people sort of like, this is what I have. And that seems like so far away. So I think that's a really important thing. So I would say like, there's these two layers. So there's this one layer, which is like, what could it be? Like totally transformative to the organization. And like the organization has a personality. It's automated. It's like there are people, but they're all superhuman because they have these AI capabilities behind them. And you just make an incredible, unsurpassed customer experience, really with this, based on like these types of things like customer obsession, which you talked about at the top. Then there's the more practical step, which people don't even know to step back. And we say in the call center specifically, right? We developed a model over at Synthetia and VoiceBot. We said, okay, listen, hey, there's something that can be done here, beyond data readiness, right? So once we have data readiness, what can we do? We could do customer agent training. And in fact, I know I have an exact example of this where there was an issue that a company thought that there was going to be a large number of its call center staff were going to be unavailable in very short notice. They had to figure out a way that they could have the rest of their employees man the phones. Well, how do you do that without doing a 6-week to 3-month training session?
Sure.
You basically give them tools that run them through some sequences very quickly, but also basically has the knowledge based on an LLM. It's your co-pilot, your advisor. It's like having someone who's been working for 3 years sitting over your shoulder and saying, now do this, now do that, look for this. They probably mean that. So there's this whole idea about agent training, which then transitions over into this agent assist. And I think that's a very basic thing. Now there's two different ways that I think about agent assist. First is the request response, kind of like I'm on it. Like if I'm a consumer, I'm asking an assistant, do I get information? What do I need? It gives me information back. Oh, clarify this for me, more information back. So that request response. There's another level here, which is a agent, which is in real time observing the call, for example, or observing the chat, and it's going to recommend things. Right. And so if it's an autonomous assistant, right, then it's just going to do that itself. But once you get into the agent queue, listening along, and as the transcript is coming in, it's actually saying, it could be this problem. It could be this problem. It could be this problem. Ask them this question. Ask them that question. Talk about superpowers, and then add on from there. One of the biggest things at Contact Center Week Berlin, which just happened in the last couple of weeks, is people are looking at real-time translation. Because people are calling in from all over the world, particularly if you're a multi-country or multi-geography organization. And after hours, can I support some of these languages? And so real-time translation is really there. And so then we get down to that idea of summarization. And then one more layer on it is actually the low-hanging fruit for a lot of people is to start to use your contact center data, both chat and voice, for call center analytics, because you can start to do new clustering and you can actually derive some insights about where your agents are doing well, early warning systems for problems that are arising that maybe you weren't aware of in your product. And so when we think about that, that's sort of even not in the big vision. It's we're going to transform everything. We're going to be superhuman employees and anything you want as a consumer anytime with these automated systems. These are just practical steps that most people haven't gotten their head around yet because they're just let me try this first thing and see how that works, and then I'll move on from there.
I wanted to bring it back to some specific recommendations. I think we identified a couple of them. First is, again, finding where LLMs can make meaningful impact, either for your internal business processes or for your external facing kind of customer support interaction. One is this notion of starting small, starting with something that is actually achievable by the makeup of your team, but thinking big, having a long-term holistic and omni-channel strategy to take that small set of capabilities and then expand it across the business. One that stands out to me is really doing due diligence to find sort of a future-proof platform that you can build with now and then use to experiment in the long term. That it does seem a bit like the wild, wild west, like the very early days of conversational assistants, that not all LLMs, not all LLM platforms are created equal, not all have comparable cost, performance, tunability. And so finding something that really does match your particular use case is going to be critical to be able to use it in the long term. Curious if you have any other big takeaways.
This is like one of my favorite topics, but this is one of the biggest problems that's in the market right now that people don't even know is coming. Some of them know. Like there's a lot of, like I've been talking to a lot of CIOs, chief digital officers recently, and a couple of things have happened. So first of all, they have a lot of solutions. Like if it's a big enterprise, they don't have one or two. They've got high single digits, many of them in the dozens, some over 100 of these solutions. Just it's been 1,000 points of light. And I think that's great because a lot of these organizations should just try something. They don't even need the big vision yet, but everybody's kind of done that. They've tried enough so they have some idea of what they can do. Then figure out your big vision, then backfill with sort of these ideas. But this idea of being independent, of not having lock-in to a specific technology provider, I think is critical. Now we have large language models which are doing, we got several of them that are leading, right? But we don't know if the next one that comes up is going to be the leading one, is going to have the functionality you need. And I think that that's ultimately is something that's very important. So I'm actually looking, this one of the things that I've been looking at right now is you need this management layer that provides that flexibility and orchestration across the organization so that you start thinking about generative AI is a capability as opposed to an application. So up to this point, most people have basically bought a product top to bottom, and they're like, that's my chat solution, or they've rolled their own. They've picked a LLM and they built application functionality on top of it, things like that. But when they do that, they basically have to think about how they're going to manage those across their organization. And I think some of these sort of centralized services, they have that common standardization around security, around governance, around moderation, safety, just around integration is going to wind up being critical. So this is like the big white space, which everybody's going to be talking about the second half of this year, because they're going to be like, how do I wrangle this? Because I got so much stuff going on.
Yeah, certainly gives a lot of food for thought. It's going to be an interesting 2024.
2024, yeah, like it's almost 2025. I feel like this year has gone so fast.
Right. Well, Bret, this has been enlightening, super interesting. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This is one of my favorite topics. I look forward to being back and talking to people and developers. By the way, like there's so much that you can do, particularly at that management layer. Everyone's sort of excited about the application layer. Sure, that's great. But this management layer, there's just a lot of new innovation coming out in that space, and developers are going to lead that.
Maybe a topic for a future webinar.
I think so.
Thank you so much for everybody out in the audience. Really appreciate you joining and listening in today. Before I go, I just wanted to remind everyone, please fill out the survey. We are constantly working to improve our webinars and other content and really value your feedback. Thank you so much to Bret. Thank you so much for everybody out there watching, and have a great rest of your day.